Welcome to the Outlier podcast. All right, everyone. I have your favorite former defense attorney back and legal commentator. Let's be honest. We all listen to him on Court TV, on News Nation. We love him. Kirk Nurmi. Welcome.
Thank you. It's always nice to talk to you, Lauren.
Well, thank you so much. And what we're going to do today is a little bit different because it's crazy that I've talked to Kirk so many times. I've interviewed him, but I always want his expertise on something. I'm using his brain here, and today I'm going to use his brain, but in a different way because it's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. It is June, and I just learned this, and pretty much June is about to be over in about a week and a half. So that's why I'm so glad that Kirk and I are getting down to business here. But Kirk, you have an incredible story, and I'm not sure that everybody is aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, my life has certainly been an interesting journey, I guess I would say. When I was in grade school, I connected to a book called She Wants to Be a Lawyer, and I really wanted to be a lawyer ever since that point in time. I mean, it was complete fiction. Everybody was happy, all that kind of thing. And there's no happy lawyers out there, not very many anyway. But I had wanted to be a lawyer since I was a child, and there were various forces telling me that my grades weren't good enough to go to law school and I should consider alternative careers and things of that nature, right? And but eventually I got there, and it was a big struggle to get there and get through law school. And I graduated in 2000 with the idea from the University of Wyoming, the idea that I was going to be a public defender when I graduated. I believed in the Sixth Amendment, and it meant a lot to me, the idea that somebody's civil liberties, nobody's freedom should be taken away from them without a vigilant fight. And in that regard, I also believe that money shouldn't be the differentiating factor in terms of who gets that kind of representation and who doesn't. So I went to Wyoming because it was going to give me some practical experience, and as well as the cost was relatively low. And so over the years, I built up that legal career. And in 2008, around 2008, my career led me for various reasons to the Capital Unit of the Public Defender's Office. And ultimately, that's where fate put the file of JODI Arias into my hand. And I mean, that case now is something that's infamous. It's a Court TV legendary trial. But back then, it was her name was foreign to me. I had no idea. I mean, at that point in time, she had done a 48 hours, I think it was, a CBS like documentary. I guess she'd done the Inside Edition interviews, a couple little things, right? But she wasn't a big household name. People find it hard to believe, but if you go back in time, she really wasn't, right? Until the trial started in 2013. And ultimately then, I had the case. I got burned out on, to make a long story short, I got burned out on death penalty work, having done 2 trials in a couple of years, and which doesn't sound like a lot, but they're long trials. They're very consuming. A lot of people
death penalty cases.
Yes, yeah. I got to the point in my career where I was only doing death penalty cases because it's very specialized type of work. It requires a lot of education, a lot of experience. You have to have so many major felony trials. You have to have continuing education that's not only on par with the standards of a practicing lawyer, but specific to the dictates of the death penalty, as well as the American Bar Association guidelines. So it's a very specialized field. So not a lot of attorneys do that. And 2 trials within 2 years is a lot because they last 3 or 4 months. You're working 12 to 16 hours a day, things of that nature, very disruptive to your life. So at that point in time, too, I'd had Miss Arias's case for about a year and a half. And of course, then I kind of had a better idea of who she was and what have you. And I wanted to get away from death penalty work. And my intention was to leave the case behind. And the judge that was presiding over the case took an uncustomary step and said, no, I'm not going to let you off this case. So my life was kind of hijacked in the sense I was planning on going into private practice with a friend of mine. We'd gone to law school together. She did a lot of DUIs, and that was going to be my life, a simpler life. I was getting older. I still had the zeal, but you get kind of burnt out of being a public defender after 8-10 years, and especially about doing death penalty cases because they are so emotionally draining. And of course, then in 2013, because I can't get away from Miss Arias, and I can't get away from this case, it's kind of taken over my whole private practice, because once you're ordered to keep a case and it's a death penalty case, you really don't have time to build a practice per se. So, my life in that sense was again hijacked. And I always say that on January 2nd, 2013, which is the day of the opening statements of Miss Arias's trial, that I was kind of introduced to the world not as Kirk Nurmi the person, but as Kirk Nurmi a character in a reality show. Because if you rethink back to that time, it really was not just a trial, not just a well-watched trial, but to me, from the inside looking out anyway, it was a cultural event, right? We had people like Donald Trump commenting on it. We had the governor of Arizona commenting on it.
Yes.
A lot of people. It was
Crazy.
not only a national obsession, but I think a worldwide obsession.
Mhm.
And ultimately, the view people had, and we see this in trials now, because I think, Casey Anthony was kind of at the verge of the social media era. But when we talk about 2013, a year or so later, those of us older folks there, Lauren, you might remember flip phones. I don't know, maybe your parents had them.
Of course I do. No, I had one.
All right. So we think about the flip phones, and how we were moving away from those towards smartphones and towards
Blackberries. Remember the
Blackberries?
Yeah.
Yes, I remember the Blackberries too. But streaming trials then became a whole new thing, right? Because like even going back to OJ, it was at the 5 o'clock news. It wasn't like in your pocket, right? It wasn't on your computer, and so people could watch a trial like Arias's day in and day out, on the bus, on at work, all those things. So it became more phenomenal, and it became an interactive experience as well, because you could go online and you could do those things. And then we're starting to see kind of that in a lot of these trials. I mean, Karen Reed's obviously the one that's going on now. We see threats to people. We see all kinds of harassment going on, cancel culture, all those sort of things, right? And I was really in the swirl of that for so long. And I'm tall. Back then I had a shaved head. I weighed more than I do now. And I was very easily recognizable, and I was pretty much on TV. And I don't say this out of hubris, 24/7. I mean, I would turn on the TV, I would be there in the local news. And it wasn't just, short little hits with coverage of the highlights. It was long, lengthy. I mean, you turn on the local news in Arizona, you would think there was nothing going on other than traffic, weather, sports, and JODI Arias, right? That was it.
That was right.
And national news, right? Headline news, people like Nancy Grace and Vinnie Politan and Joe Scott Morgan, they're all talking about, and HLN's programming was from morning till night, was all JODI Arias. I mean, it was some other things, but then eventually it became all JODI Arias. And so I got a lot of the pressure and the threats and the heat, and opening my mail with rubber gloves, just out of and different things. Very, very concerning. A time of hypervigilance that really ended, for the most part, in 2015 when Miss Arias was sentenced. That's when I was free, so to speak. But going back to this is all background to kind of get to the point of your question. Is so in 2015, I'm at this point in time, and it's April, so it's still not quite miserable out in Arizona, and I'm out going for a jog, and I don't have anything to do, and I realized how detached I felt from the practice of law. I didn't want to do it anymore. And that was a weird feeling, because again, you think about something that's a guiding principle in your life, since grade school, something you want to do, and then you don't. And, I attributed it to burnout and those sort of things, right? And there's certainly something to that, because I've been working on this case for so long, and it's like having your worst day at work publicized to worldwide TV every single day, right? And you can't stand up and say, listen, ladies and gentlemen, I don't really want to be here, but here I am, right?
I know.
And
I
you
know.
can't give interviews and say, hey, listen, this is what I think of the case, but I got to try it anyway. That's
You
not
got to
the
be
way
like,
it
I
works.
agree with what you're saying. I just
Yeah,
have to do
yeah.
this. Yeah,
You have
can't
to
that.
tell the story, right? So
Yeah.
so after that, it was a real time for me, and I think it was the first time. And I think that when we talk about mental health, and obviously there's, we're at Men's Mental Health Month, right? But I think these things affect women too. So I don't want anything I say to do it, but a lot of men are hooked to our identity as our careers, right? I mean, what do we say when we go out and meet people? What do you do for a living, right? And that becomes really an identity hook. We make judgments on that person based on that, etc., right? And that becomes a real thing for men. I mean, I was raised by grandparents who were well-intended, but they grew up in the Depression era. You didn't quit a good job. You didn't do these things, right? And so your job was kind of your identity there. And that's when there started becoming a kind of a schism. I didn't maybe recognize it that way, but there's like, wow, how much we're wrapped up in our identity and how that can cause strain in our lives, right? If we don't want to do that. I have friends now that are at the public defender's office that said, well, I've got 9 more years till retirement. They're taking down the retirement clock, right? They're living in misery to get to this finish line, to get to this retirement pension, what have you, if they're lucky enough to make it, right? So, you think about all those things. And one of the things that correlates into this, Lauren, I think, is that, when we're taught as human beings to, we want to get the job and the career and the house and the white picket fence, we think happiness is going to jump right over that white picket fence, but it doesn't, right? And so it doesn't always, anyway. And so a few months later, I was grappling kind of with this identity, and we went up, my wife and I went on some vacations, bucket list trips. And then when I was about ready to resign myself to going back to my law practice, because I had not found anything else that inspired me, and that's kind of who I was at that point in time too. That's when I noticed a lump under my right armpit. My lymph node had inflamed, and long story short, that led to a diagnosis of stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which at that point in time, and this is September, this is coming right off the Arias trial, and a few months, 2015, and I immediately in my heart knew that the cancer that had invaded my body was related to the stress of everything involved representing Miss Arias for those 5.5 years. And I didn't maybe recognize it at the time, and there was certainly no clinical diagnosis of it, but there was some anger, some resentment, because there I was in this situation where I didn't want to be in, and now I didn't want to practice law anymore, and now I had to fight for my life, right? And I had about statistically about, I think it was 72% chance of survival at my age, and they have the actuary tables to that effect.
It's very hard to hear, regardless, that there is even a percentage of your life that could, even if it was a 1% chance, that is still hard to hear.
Yeah, it is. And that was, to me, I took that was about a third, and I had about a third of a chance that I wasn't going to make it. And based on the stress of a trial that I didn't want to be any part of. So, and then I'm disconnected from my identity. And there was, like I say, not really diagnosed, but there was a lot of depression. There was a lot of resentment. And around at this point in time too, going back a few months, I guess, Miss Arias had given an interview where she blamed all her, I don't know if you ever saw it. It was a local at the bottom of the jail while the jury was deliberating between life or death. She basically gave an interview and said, oh, this whole defense was my idea and things of that nature, right? So, and there was all that out there. And, the question for me was, what was I going to do? And, there's so many times, like, I think I kept this to myself, really. And one of the, I didn't, I mean, my wife obviously knew of my cancer diagnosis, but how I was going to deal with it, and et cetera, was something that I hadn't quite discussed with her, that I needed to internalize myself. And I think, sometimes, Lauren, women can be criticized for the exact emotions they have. Like if you're upset or something like that,
Yeah.
your friends might try to change it, make it happy, like it's not okay to be sad. But men are really criticized for having emotions at all, right?
Yeah.
They're criticized for expressing emotion. They're not told they're the wrong ones. They're not supposed to express them. So there was certainly an internal battle. And one of my internal battles was I going to undergo chemotherapy? I knew
Oh, wow.
chemotherapy, ravaged the body, but yeah, I went to a really dark place, because I knew it was going to be, in essence, suicide by cancer, if you will. But I wondered what, there I was in my 40s. I didn't want to practice law anymore. My identity was kind of gone in that regard. And what was the life I was going to live? Was that going to be worth saving? And that became really my question I had to think about as I moved forward. And when I had to answer that for myself. I really felt like, I couldn't just say, oh, I don't want my wife to be a widow, or, I want to know who wins the next World Series, or I want to watch Big Brother next summer.
Yeah.
It's my favorite show. Okay. But it had to be for me. Why did I want to keep living? And one of the things that I did was I came to the conclusion that I would fight cancer, but I made a promise to myself. And one of the promises I made to myself was that if I was lucky enough to survive the cancer, the diagnosis, that I wasn't going to live my remaining days the way I had my prior. Because I also, in that regard, challenged myself with a question. And I say challenge, confront, what have you, because I don't think many of us do that enough. I certainly hadn't done it till I got the cancer diagnosis, is we never confront ourselves with the question, are you happy?
Yeah.
We seldom do that, because we have the career, we have the family, we have whatever it is in our lives, and we just assume we are. And we really have to, I think, a key when we talk about mental health is happiness, right? And there's so much unhappiness that gets channeled into bad habits, whether it's bad eating, right? Because, back then I probably had at least 50, 60 pounds more than I do now on me.
You did.
A lot of attorneys, around me were drinking and that sort of thing, right? And you see that across the board in all professions. But that kind of suppression of emotions that we see a lot with men, is then that gets rechanneled into other bad habits, and we don't think about the unhappiness of it all. Unhappy or happy people aren't getting drunk and getting into bar fights. We've got a case now where a judge in Atlanta hits a cop. I'm guessing that judge, no matter how successful they are, was not happy, right? And we see this all across strata, whether you're poor, rich, or poor, famous, what have you. If you're not happy, these things are going to manifest themselves in different ways. So I made the promise to myself that I wasn't going to live those remaining days the way I had my prior. And I stumbled a little bit. I took a couple cases out of chemotherapy, but I realized how uninspired I was and how I wanted to live my life in a different way. And when and at the same time, I had the catharsis of writing this book to impose truth upon Miss Arias's lies, which is now one of my favorite hobbies, is imposing truth upon her lies, because it won't go away. I mean, I get contacted by TV networks all the time looking to do shows and things of that nature, right? And so it's never going to go away. And that's one of the other things, like you when you have a connection with something bad, I spent years trying to run away from it. Then I realized I couldn't run fast enough, right? So, but one of the things that I did, I think the key when we talk about these things, and when I go out and do motivational speaking and things of this nature, I really talk about that happiness and really that connection that men need to have with happiness instead of quote unquote success.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, everything you said is so intriguing and fascinating, and something that I had said, I did not know your story when I first got in touch with you to weigh in on the Grant Solomon case. I didn't really know all of this. I looked you up after the fact because I was like, he looks 20 years younger now than he did when he was defending Jodi Arias, which was a decade ago, or well over a decade ago. And then I saw your story and I was like, oh my gosh, this is very intense. And I didn't realize how painful all of that was for you at the time. Knowing how painful it was, I think that if people don't realize what something can do to you mentally, how it can actually cause your body to deteriorate physically, well, you have another thing coming to you. I mean, really, because I'm certain you probably weren't sleeping during that time. You probably were eating like garbage because of your schedule, and everything was weighing on you. So I just find this so it's incredible the way you were able to just decide and turn everything around. And this goes for men and women. It is hard when we do something for a living and we think that this defines us. It doesn't define us. It really doesn't. We're just so used to holding on to this because that's what we've had for so long, and that's how we've defined ourselves, I guess. So I think that it's really inspiring. And that if anyone is going through something similar, they should read your book. They should listen to your story.
Well, and Lauren, I think one of the things we forget in our lives is that when we talk about these kind of things in our identity, that everything is temporary, right? There was a
Yes.
version of you that existed before you were a hotshot reporter, right? Before you were the big time. There was a version of you that was at grade school. There's a version of you that was in college, and there's going to be maybe a version of you down the road, right?
Mhm.
And all those things, there's something constant within you that existed throughout that plane of existence. And I call that, you talk about my books, I call that your greatness. So I could defend your greatness, because that's what happens, right? We're born, think about, we're born into this world, and man or woman, we feel like we can do anything. We're going to be the president, we're going to be a princess, we're going to be whatever we're going to be, until we're molded and told, no, 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 you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't be Superman or what have you. And there's some practicality to that, but at the same time, that greatness within us and that happiness and that feeling like we can do everything, why do we let that die? I mean, why do we let life, I did an interview a while back, and he said, your days must be so different, and they are. I try to compare them to Christmas morning. Every day is going to be different, and that's an exciting way to live our lives. And one of the things we have to do for our mental health, and men especially, is to be able to open up and talk about it. I'm excited. I'm going to be doing guiding and speaking at a men's retreat in September, right? And talking about some of these principles. I'll be able to announce more of that on my social media later. But that idea of opening that up, and because if you ask most people, are they happy? They're going to say yes. Men in particular, yeah, I've got this job, I've got this car, I've got whatever it is. And they don't reflect back at the deeper level of their happiness. So there's a lot to get through. There's a lot of shell buildup. There's a lot of ego. I mean, we don't just sell handbags. We sell designer handbags, and people take pride in the fact that their bag has a certain brand on it. And part of that is just societal marketing all together, this idea of being better than someone else and things of that nature that are very antithetical to our true nature, if you ask me. So, but I think it's a matter of, when we talk about mental health, it's about really opening yourself up and confronting yourself and being okay to talk about it, especially as a man. I mean, I used to do life coaching for lawyers, and a lot of men in those situations would just break down, because that status, they were proving that they were worthy based on the status of a particular job. And how sad is that, when we take our self-worth and we tie it too much to external validation, that can really become a problem. I mean, there's an element to it, like when people are getting canceled, like I was back in 2013, and people get harassment and things of that nature. there can be a real debilitating deal because you're kind of like you're voted out of the tribe, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Or yeah, right. Or you're sneered out. I remember being sneered out so many times out
yeah,
in public and things of that nature. Just, date night with my wife on a Friday or
yeah,
Saturday night kind of thing. But we don't, we don't care enough about each other, and we don't care enough about ourselves. I mean, one of the things that is to me so big on mental health is anybody who is in a caregiving type of role, like you're a mother, there's nurses, there's lawyers out there, doctors. When we care for somebody else, we tend to slough off self-care, right? And
yeah,
because oh, listen, I need to do this surgery or whatever, and it makes sense to a certain degree. I need to work on this case, but it just becomes a habit rather than an exception. And
yeah.
when we don't care for ourselves enough, we don't love ourselves enough, and we don't put a high enough priority on ourselves and our mental health.
Yes. Sorry, there was a ambulance going around. I was
That's
trying to
okay.
stop it. Yeah. No, you make a lot of sense. And I wanted to ask you, did you drink alcohol before your cancer diagnosis, and did you give it up after, or did you give it up at all? Or I just a side note, I noticed that a lot of attorneys at CrimeCon specifically, uh, nobody drank. I thought that was interesting. It was a question, like, you'd meet someone and you'd be like, oh, do you want to meet for a drink later? If you don't drink, that's fine. We can get a seltzer. I noticed this for attorneys and law enforcement. Not a lot of people drink.
That's interesting because
Yeah.
my experience in a day-to-day existence was that attorneys do drink. I mean, I wasn't much of a drinker. I was an occasional drinker.
Okay.
I'm not a drinker now after the diagnosis. I mean, it's not that no alcohol would cross my lips, but basically, no, I don't drink. And so, I think maybe what you're seeing is the exception rather than the rule.
I was going to say this, what I gathered is actually these people, a lot of these people used to drink excessively, and now they don't drink at all. That's what I gathered from it, because some of these people are former DAs, turned legal commentators, where they've realized, okay, I was drinking a lot in the time that I was working, and that I was very overwhelmed and stressed, as you were. And then they kind of realized maybe I didn't make some great decisions, and now I don't drink anymore. I can't tell you how many people I ran into that practice law or did practice law, or who were former law enforcement, now turned content creators, whatever, who were like, we don't drink anymore. So I thought that was interesting. That I think you're right. People did at one point, but now I think it's come to a point where their mental health matters, and this wasn't good for their mental health.
Well, and you kind of get out of the vortex of this stuff when you really think about, I talk to people that do the news, used to do the news on a daily basis, and they talk about
Yeah.
reading the horrors, and then, they're talking about a fatal car crash with a big smile on their face, right? And
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? How draining that can be. And then you really think about it when you talk about the world that those people occupy, right? The world that the Joe Scott Morgans and Cheryl McCombs and all these people occupy, the first responders, the stress of it all. You see the worst of humanity. And not only that, but because of the cases, because of the stress, because of the desire to help, self-care gets put on the back burner. And turning towards, and not pointing out at any of those people as it relates to this, but
Yeah.
it's easier to pick up a beer than to go to the gym and run 5 miles or something
Right.
of that nature, right? That's an easier stress relief. And I saw that, and I think, one of the reasons I was maybe overweight is because food was the substitute. I wasn't gonna become a drunken lawyer. I was just, an overweight lawyer, right? So I mean,
No,
it's that
I
kind of
get
thing.
it. I
Yeah.
totally get it. I mean, I think my weight has fluctuated. It was more so when I was fully immersed in being an entertainment reporter. It was like I would put my kids to bed, either get a babysitter or make sure my husband could come home, and then I would go out to whatever event that was going on so I could be seen, so I could get a scoop, whatever it was. And then they'd have lots of food, lots of drinks. And the next thing you know, I'm drinking these. And by the way, these drinks were not to get drunk. They were probably 800 calories a drink just to, you know what I mean, that they're making
Yeah.
to hand out and look good. And then, the next thing you know, I'm looking back at pictures of myself from 2 years ago, and I'm probably 20 pounds heavier. And I didn't even realize at the time, but it's just your lifestyle, right? It's just like, this is what I don't know if it's more like a chameleon type of thing where I'm just changing based on what I'm doing. But I think for something like this and for the world that we are in now, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to drink a lot and to get to this. I think that if I were to drink a lot or to go out and have drinks, my brain would go to a horrible place, just from what we are reviewing and seeing on a daily basis here. Do you know what I'm saying? I just think that, yeah, like I'm just not
Well,
there anymore.
yeah, I certainly think that, again, there can be different reasons for it. We get in social situations. You wanted to be a success, so you wanted to blend in, right? And that
Yeah.
becomes kind of the deal, right? Where you're saying, okay, I know this isn't good for me, but this is what it takes to succeed. And that's kind of the shelving of the self-care, isn't it? To succeed. Like, I should get some
Yeah.
sleep, but I need to do this in order to be
Yes.
successful, right? And
Yes.
success is always so commonly, well too commonly defined, not as happiness. I don't know why it should be defined as happiness, shouldn't it, when we really think about it? But it's defined as status, job,
Yeah.
car, income, things of that nature. We can even define ourselves by how much money we have in the bank account, right?
Right.
And that
Right.
becomes a real impediment to happiness. And then you look back and, one of the things you have to confront yourself with then is, am I happy? Was I happy doing this? Why not? What was I doing? So there's all kinds of things you can look at. But when you start making happiness the beacon, I
Yeah.
think a lot of the fog around your life clears up.
I think you're right. And not to get too personal, but I'm curious because, your wife, when you guys got married, I'm assuming you were either right out of law school, you were in law school, so she married a lawyer and she knows you as a lawyer. So how did this affect your marriage in any way, or was it for the better because you just seemed to relax a little bit more? Maybe she noticed that you were so high stress for the last X many years and she's happy that you're happy. I noticed that I've been through a career change, and sometimes I feel for my husband because I'm like, you didn't marry a reporter, and you didn't marry someone that's very into crime and pop culture. You married someone that was in digital marketing and was a former actress. So I feel that, yeah, that it can affect our spouses.
Yeah, but going back to that question, I mean, I've been married so long. This was before
Yeah.
law school. I've been married almost 31 years. So,
Okay. Okay. Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So this is before law school, but she knew I wanted to be a lawyer at the time and married me anyway. But I think it goes back to this idea, Lauren, that we're really not. You talk about identifying with a career. What did you do? You just described that your husband was marrying X person who had X career, and now you
Yeah.
have X career. That's not true. That's not accurate. He married you for who you are, what's underneath you, the loving
Yeah.
person that you are, not, hey, she's got this career, so I'm going to marry her. I mean, I don't think you married your husband because of his career, right? So, um,
No, you're right, but I guess we met at work, and that was like we always had so much to talk about with, you know what I mean? Because we were always on the same wavelength, I guess. And now it's just different. It's totally great, but I find it to be, so when I say that, I guess it's like he married someone that was in his world that knows exactly what's going on with what he's talking about, his lingo. And now I'm like, what does that mean? What is that? And I'm trying to tell him about the Karen Reed trial, and he's like, I don't care. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's just different. That's all.
I do. It
Yeah.
is different, but that part of you that existed when he met you is still
Yes.
there now, and that's sometimes what we don't see, we don't reflect on in the broader scheme of things. So, um,
Yeah.
to get back to the heart of your question, I mean, I think that, I certainly talked to my wife about this departure from law, and the bar wanted to
Yeah.
suspend me for 4 years, and I actually asked for disbarment because I felt And we could have gone in, we could have fought the
Yeah.
suspension. There could have been no suspension.
Right.
There could have been 6 months. But I felt like as if I needed to move on from that in my life to really connect, to really grow, to that there was another mission involved, to talking about things like this, to talk about mental health, to talk about cancer, to show other. I mean, I did a part of my body transformation was I was cast in a reality show called Radical Body Transformation.
Yeah.
It'll probably never make the airwaves. Season 3 will probably never make the airwaves thanks to COVID and some other things. But I did that show in such a public forum, that weight loss in such a public forum, because I wanted to show other cancer survivors what life after chemo could be like, because I knew how scared I was about life after chemo if I was lucky enough to survive. So there was other missions, there was other things I wanted to do. And so I think in the sense that it's made our marriage stronger, because going back to what I said about you and it brought out more of me. It brought out more of the person I am. I mean, I remember one of those cathartic moments I had along this journey was I had one of those certificates that says you're admitted to practice law in the state of Arizona, and it's in this big frame and it's got all the gold embossing and all that stuff. And at some point in time, after I finally detached from the practice of law and really wanted to move on, I took that sucker out of the frame and I set fire to it. And I did that, and it was one of the most cathartic experiences, because it really was burning my past, as it were, not out of anger, not out of anything else, but about moving on and moving to the next phase.
I'm having trouble with this. I love the release of it, but do you also feel like that was a lot of hard work? You put a lot of work into that piece of paper. I mean, I would be like, oh, all the money I spent on my education and all the time. Like, I totally love that. That's freedom. But I guess you worked so hard.
If we're not happy, if we're not happy, what's it worth?
Yeah.
Are we going to cling to a past simply because we worked so hard to get there if we're not happy? That's a lot of the things we do, right?
Yeah.
Going back to what I said earlier about the attorney that had 9 more years of this crap. I'll sanitize a little bit. 9 more years of this crap, because before he could retire. Well, see, just saying, I'm just going to set up myself for 9 years of misery based on the fact that I got this degree and I make a decent living off this degree. So I don't care how, because, it's like, I remember reading this from Wayne Dyer. I think this is the original source. Like, most of us, we go into college, we're 18 or 19. Maybe we become an accountant. Maybe we just start taking accounting courses because we're attracted to somebody in the accounting class or what have you.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, you're an accountant sitting in a cubicle, right? And you're miserable. But you don't decide to pursue your happiness because you've got this piece of paper or you've got this career and only 10 more years to retirement, and it's a comfortable misery. I mean, comfort zones are great places, but no growth happens in them. And even if they're comfortable in the sense of the life we have and what have you, why are we not prioritizing happiness in that regard? Because you're living in the past, right? And this is the old saying about you got a bigger front window than a rear view mirror, because you're not going there. And we tie ourselves to that, and that's part of the identity too. Oh, I was a lawyer. I worked so hard for this. I went to law school. I did all this stuff, and I'm miserable, but I don't care because I'm so stubborn that I'm going to carry this baggage I don't want to carry for the rest of my life until it kills me, instead of just setting it down and moving on. And that's a biggie.
Yeah. You make a lot of good points. And this is why somebody like me should hear you speak, because you know what? I don't think it's just me. I think that would be a lot of people. A lot of people, that would be their one thing to stop them from letting go and stop them from, let's say, being happy doing something else. Let's say you're a doctor, or let's say you put 10 years of your life into something and you would just say, I'm miserable, but I've spent so much time and energy on this. I don't know anything else. It's a big step. And I think it takes a lot of courage. And it's probably not a decision that one can clearly make overnight or without the support of loved ones and family and friends to truly understand what you're going through. But yeah, I think a lot of people need to hear that. Just because
Yeah.
you spent time and energy and maybe money doesn't mean you need to spend the rest of your life being unhappy.
Right. And why is it that you, when you think about it in those terms, it makes no sense. It really makes no sense.
Yeah.
And that's why I talk about unhappiness. You go out on the street, you go out in New York, how many happy people are bopping around the subway? Not many people, right? And how many people do you talk to that maybe that made that career change, that made that leap? And yeah, there can be a lot of fear associated with it, but I would say this to you, Lauren. I would say that the best way to do this is really mostly not telling other people,
Yeah.
because there's so
Okay.
many people that are going to say, no, come on, Lauren, what are you talking about? You work so hard to be a reporter, you got this education, what
Yeah.
are you talking about? You want to do this or that, right? Because, and then that negativity, that just increases the fear, right? So
Yeah.
I certainly talked about it with my wife, and then, because obviously it was going to affect our lives, and
Yeah.
she deserved that conversation. But I didn't go talk to my lawyer buddies about it. I didn't go talk to, because, misery loves company. And if you
Yeah.
stay in the company of misery, you're going to stay miserable. And so this idea that we just have to make that leap. And you're right. Fear is a big part of it, right? Because we're taught that, we got to have this good job, and
Yeah.
all our fears in this regard typically wind up with us living under a bridge somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Scavenging for food. But that's not always gonna be the case, and we have to just rely on who we are, that greatness inside of us. Like, that's what I was talking about, defend your greatness, because it's
Yeah.
under attack. You weren't brought onto this planet to be miserable and to live under a bridge. What you brought to bring your talents in full to light, and that may be in the job you're at now, and it may not be, and it might be in the job you're doing now for the next 5 years, and then 5 years from now it might be something different, because we're
Yeah.
not static. We're constantly evolving human beings. As I say, you're not going to be as excited by whatever, cartoon you used to love when you were five
Yeah.
years old, because we evolve and change. We don't think about that, right? We get in this career, and it's supposed to be like our career, right? And our identity. And then that's going to be it until we get the gold watch and a box to
Yeah.
carry our stuff out the door. And, that's, and I think I see this with a lot of the younger generation. They don't take that look at it. They look
Yeah.
more, it's transitory, and they accept more that life has its changes, and we change, and how we see things changes.
Yeah, and something you said also, it struck me a little bit as well, because I think this happens to a lot of us in this field. You and I are big on social media. We say our opinions a lot on our own show and on different shows, and we tend to get dragged a lot. And earlier this, or maybe I guess a couple months ago, I was really proud of this one episode that I researched with my researcher on an indigenous man from a television show. He's a public figure. And I was proud of the work that we did on this episode. Nobody was covering this story. I think I saw Daily Mail covered it in a really negative way. They painted this guy in a really negative light. And we just wanted to showcase his tribe. We wanted to just not speculate anything because the case wasn't closed. Just wanted to bring awareness around it. And the feedback and the reception I got, Kirk, actually made me worse than the Karen Reed trolls and all that stuff. It was worse
Yeah.
than anything I've ever experienced before, based on the fact, I guess I was told by some people in a Facebook group I didn't have permission from the family. I did speak to an aunt to get some quotes. I didn't speak to his father directly, but again, he's a public figure. And I mean, there's lots of aspects to this, right? Like,
Yeah.
I spoke to a family member who said father was busy, dad's busy, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I'm just
That's okay.
yeah, I'm going all over the place now, but yeah. So, and my response to one of these people was, I did speak to a family member, but like, again, he's a public figure. I'm a reporter. You don't actually need permission, but I think that you'll find if you listen, everything is painted in a very positive light, whatever. Well, next thing you know, every single one of my social media is going crazy. I'm getting horrible reviews everywhere, and people are saying that I don't respect grieving families. And that hit home to me. That's when I was like, what is happening? Like, this was not my intention. And then the guy, Cold Brings Plenty, that's the actor's name. I don't even know if I said it just now. His father made this Facebook message about me. And then I was just like, oh my gosh, now I'm taking this down. This got completely blown out of proportion. And again, this was about 2 months ago. And I was like, I don't know if I'm meant for this. I was trying to help. And this just took me to a place. I come across really upbeat,
Yeah.
positive, whatever. It took me to a place where I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I was told by some of these people in my inbox and directly that not only did I not respect grieving families, Kirk, but I have white privilege. I'm a white savior that and I had just never heard this before. And I was like, okay, and that was where I was like, am I getting pushed out of what I'm doing, or am I going to push myself out here? I don't know. But it does take some thick skin to get through a lot of this when your intentions are pure. And when people say you're coming at this for clicks and views, I'm kind of like, oh, do you think that like I make a full living off this? Like this is
Yeah.
like I don't have a million other freelance jobs. It's just like this is crazy. You guys are not understanding. But anyway, that was
Well, and that gives you a little insight in terms of I think what I went through with JODI Arias. I mean, it was on a magnitude
much bigger.
unimaginable. I
Yeah.
mean, the millions and the death threats and all those sort of things, right?
Oh,
But one of the things that connecting to my greatness and my happiness and things of that nature has allowed me to recognize that stuff like that, like I don't even give it my energy. I wouldn't even respond because I know my intentions, they don't. And I'm always cognizant of the fact that hurt people. And so I think about that, and I think about these people are obviously hurt. I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to give it my energy, and I just don't worry about it. And that's the best advice I could give you. And it's also great advice, not just on social media, but in life, right? We get a lot of judgment from others. And, we talked about fear in terms of putting my career behind me and everything else. But part of that is judgment, right? Like, oh my gosh, so he's not going to practice law anymore because of this or that. And he wants to, there's going to be a lot of judgment, whether it's positive or negative. And it really doesn't matter, because if you know your intentions that are in your heart, you don't really need to justify them to anyone else.
Yeah, I no, and you're right. I agree. I felt like I was very confused. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this absolutely was not my intention." And I don't usually engage, but I think we all have those days, right? Where we're like we're getting attacked and we're like, "Wait, I need to say something here." And you know what? Looking back, you're right. I wish I never said anything. I wish I didn't even respond, because just after his dad tweeted or whatever, said something, I ended up taking the episode down. And I was like, because again, if everybody's hurting, this was not my intention to cause any additional grief or harm. However, I'm not comparing myself to a parent that's lost a child. God, absolutely not.
Yeah.
He had nothing to do with it. But the people that are part of this, I'm just like, I guess I got confused here, where I'm like, I don't know what these people's goals are besides just ripping other people down. And that's how a lot of these people are. They just do it from behind a keyboard when they have no idea what you're going through, what I'm going through. People had no idea at the time, but you didn't want to be there. You didn't really have a choice. Like it wasn't. So I feel for you. And, just really quick, I don't think I realized that you started that as a public defender. I did not realize that at all.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. I mean, I was assigned the case as a public defender in the capital unit. It was all death penalty cases, and like I said in the beginning, JODI Arias' name was foreign to me, and so that's but listen, that part of the story doesn't facts don't matter. I mean, we tend to be in a place in this world where feelings matter more than facts, right? And it doesn't fit into the storyline, if you will, to people's narrative to look back and really even reflect on what somebody's intentions might be, or why they. I mean, I still get mail telling me that I'm lying about certain aspect, like my appointment to the case. There's minute entries, everything else, right? But it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me because I know why I was there. I know what I went through, and the greatest part of it all. And I guess it was about a year and a half ago in 2013, we hit the 10-year mark. And I made this, I put this post up on Facebook and talking about how I'd rather live in a world where Jodi Arias didn't kill Travis Alexander. But once that was set in motion, ultimately, with condolences to everyone that died of cancer and everything else, I was glad I went through everything I did, because I was grateful for all the life lessons. And it's not a matter of tragedy or sympathy. It's a matter of really connecting to who we are. And if the more things that we have that can connect us to who we are, the better chance we have to be happy and really enjoying this life. Because, Lauren, I think about if you were on your deathbed tomorrow, you wouldn't be worried about what someone said to you on Twitter. And so why worry about it now? Because they're both moments of your life. Don't let that steal your joy that you're having when you're out watching your kids play baseball or climb rock walls or whatever they're off doing.
Yeah,
right?
God, I know. Breaking their
don't
leg.
don't let that steal your joy, because it's a moment of your life, and you're not gonna say, God, you're not gonna be on that deathbed saying, man, I wish I would have responded to, or I wish I would have fought on politics more with people online, right?
Yeah,
No, you're just right. And those are the kind of things. So it's like, if somebody wants to write me an email and tell me what a horrible person I am, I'm not gonna worry about it, because it's a moment in my life, and I'd rather go enjoy time with my wife and my dog and care for myself. And that's the biggest mental health thing we can do, is really care for ourselves. I love that. I'm gonna leave you with this, or we keep going, but I want to make sure I get this out there. I think one of the coolest things that I've been doing lately, I lied. I'm going to give you two things. One of the coolest things that I started doing a while back, I have a friend of mine, and she and I text each other every morning with 3 things that we were grateful for about our lives, every single morning. And it brings some accountability to it, because you're doing it with somebody else. And it brings you in a space of gratitude right away, because you say, I am so grateful for all these things. And it might be, I know you're having a heat wave in New York. It might be air conditioning. It might be something simple, but you're happy for that. And that puts you in that state first thing in the morning. We do that text. The other thing that I think is kind of cool is called a When Life Works list. And one of the things you can do, you can write maybe half dozen, 10 things down of things that in your life that when you're happy, these things are happening. Maybe it's going to yoga class, or spending time with your kids, or watching, whatever it is, right? Sleeping 8 hours a day, eating healthier, and just make a list of those things. Now, when is my life really at its happiest, fullest? I feel energized, etc. And then when you start going downhill, so like, go back and look at that list. And I can almost guarantee you're not doing the things on that list. You're not getting enough sleep. You're not eating right? You have a couple of days where you don't get sleep because of something somebody said on the internet. Maybe you're not eating as healthy, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go back to that list and you say, I need to start doing more of this, because this is when my life works.
That's a really good idea. I love that. I love both of those ideas. And I always tell my kids, people have heard me say this, my kids hear it a lot, never take an ordinary day for granted. I always say that, right? We get up, mommy makes breakfast, we go to school, I pick you up after whatever, and we have just an ordinary day, but that's a great day. It's a great day, no matter what. And then it's just crazy, because my son was in a wheelchair for 6 weeks when he broke his leg. And when you're a toddler or a kid, I guess, they put the cast from your toe all the way up to your waist. So one morning I'm saying, never take an ordinary day for granted. The very next day he's in a wheelchair with and all of our lives are changed for the next 6 weeks. So we're like, this is what happened, and it's not a big deal. We'll get through it, but we didn't take yesterday for granted, so at least we've got that. But But no, I love listening to you, and you're so inspiring, and I want everyone to be able to hear more about this weekend that you're hosting, a men's weekend. So I'm going to put all your links in the episode notes, but if you have anything with that weekend that's available, I'll throw that in there as well.
Well, that'll be down the road. The specifics will probably,
Okay.
it's not till the end of September. So I'll be sharing those on all my social media platforms. But yeah, it's exciting, and it's nice to be able to facilitate. And one of these days, I'm going to get back to doing my one-man show. I did a one-man show called Overcoming JODI Arias, and it got a little frustrating during COVID time, but we'll see how it goes. But
dude, you got to take it to New York. It'd be great. Oh my gosh. I'll get you a whole crowd. I will fill that room. Are you kidding me? I will fill that room, Kirk. You have my word for, oh my gosh. That would be so fun. I'll literally do all your PR in New York. Seriously, it'd be amazing. Well, Kirk Nurmi, thank you so much for joining me. Guys, like I said, I always put all of Kirk's information in the episode notes. If you don't follow him, you have to. He's the best. I mean, again, some of the comments I get, everybody likes how you always just speak your mind and you say it in such a respectful way. And I think that's why you don't get a lot of trolls anymore. You really, I mean, obviously the JODI Arias days, those are completely different, but I'm saying nowadays, I feel like it's like, how do you troll Kirk? He's so respectful, like anyway, yeah.
Don't challenge him out there, but let me leave you and your listeners with one last thing. I keep lying, I keep adding one more thing to it. But what I want to say, because it came up, when we were talking about my show, one of the things I say in my show, and I promise I'll shut up after this. I say, if I can overcome JODI Arias and everything that entailed, and the cancer that followed, you can overcome the things that are challenging you in your life and standing between you and your happiness.
Yep. Amen. Really. Amen. And I love it. Well, Kirk Nurmi, thank you so much. I'm sure I'll be bothering you again next week. So, I mean, don't go far.
Pleasure's all mine, Lauren. Always.
Never a bother.
That's right.